Hey there. So a couple of days ago, an assassination attempt was made on Alexander Dugin, one of the prominent Russian thought leaders. The bomb was planted under the car that he was supposed to go in. Instead, he took other car from the event, but the explosion did blow up his daughter. So we want to talk about who is Dugin and who is behind the explosions. And to put it simply, he's a piece of shit. But let's talk about this. So Dugin was the son of the Soviet colonel general of the Soviet military intelligence. So right from the get-go, from the childhood, he was very close to the special services of the Russian Federation as well. And he was openly, from the childhood as he was very openly fascist, Nazist. So he was extremely far right, if you want to use that scale. And he was not light in his expressions. He expressed that Russian essentially people are the most dominant people in the region, that all of the other people in the region should be essentially subjugated, and his thought leadership permeated also further from that. We know that some of his work has been later used to build the philosophy of the Kremlin, and essentially his ideas is pretty much now the red line that goes all throughout the special forces of the Russian Federation. So whenever we're talking about what is the Russian fascist philosophy, that whenever we're talking about, very often the name of Dugin will come up. And his daughter obviously was not a saint and an innocent bystander to all of this. She, from also very young age, was a strict follower of all the fascists. So whenever you Google her image, for example, in youth, you will find her standing with some either swastika or something that is not swastika in hand. So she was very much a follower of the same fascist ideology. And as she grew up, she became essentially the hands of the Dugin. She was executing on a lot of the things and trying to promote and more that fascist and ultranationalist philosophy from the Russian Federation that is now driving this hatred towards both Ukrainians and us people in the West. So she was definitely not a saint. And that's why we know that most probably the target here was obviously Dugin, because while she was essentially the hands that did all of the dirty work and all of this human hating philosophy and acting on it, it was Dugin's ideas who are still driving the plot in this area. And apparently the Russian FSB has already found who is behind killing of Dugina, and they're saying it is the Ukrainians. But I'm here to argue that those are not Ukrainians, and it's more likely to be someone else. Firstly, let's try to understand why was Dugin relevant and who would want to target them. So for Ukrainians, I would argue, and what Ukrainians already stated themselves, because we know that we cannot just believe what Russians are saying, because Russians always lie whenever they are speaking. And Ukrainians have said that they do not track this incident to their special forces. And why would they? As Ukrainians, they mostly right now are focused on the war efforts, and there are multiple other targets that would be relevant to get rid of before Dugina or Dugin himself. Because while his philosophy is what poisoned essentially the well of the Russian thought and what brought essentially this war to our doorstep in Europe, it is not really him that is executing it right now, and it's not really him who is driving it right now. So there is no targets, and there is very little benefits for Ukrainian to get rid of him right now. There are a lot more important targets on the line. Then there is the side that is talking that it was an inside job by the Russian special forces, and it was just a sacred sacrifice to put essentially Russian population on board with more mobilization and get them engaged into war in Ukraine. But to be honest, there is very little proof about this, and right now it is falling only in a conspiracy theory framework that it's just, wow, this would be so convenient. we have not seen the Russian Federation acting on that killing, right? Because their whole narrative on that is it was an inside job, so now the Russians will use it to essentially speed up their essentially military progress or recruitment progress, or try to rile up the Russian population. But what we've seen that's been not as much done and is not as actively, so it still might get exploited in the future. But if it would be an inside job, that I think we would receive messages that Russians should be riled up right as that happened, right? Basically, we needed to see that it was Ukrainians and probably some arrested Ukrainians with Ukrainian symbols, basically almost like waiting to drink the blood of Dugina right next by where they were captured by the Russian special forces. So we know how Russian special forces operate. They are not as precise as people want them to be. As much as we like to romanticize and say, oh, they're so professional, if we kind of follow the chain of events prior to this war and see how the Russian special forces, special services operate, they are not as special. Like, well, they're special, but in some other ways. And additionally, yesterday, there was actually a claim that was done by an internal resistance within Russia. And for me, this makes sense. Because while Dugin is not a big target for Ukrainian side, right, and because he does not aid the current war effort and survival of the Ukrainian nation, it does make sense for some kind of internal resistance within the Russian Federation, because there are two contingencies for the Russian internal resistance. One is that the people inside of Russia, they are ideological and they want to see who was the root cause of this. So obviously they have some kind of ideological enemies that they want to get rid of, that they would show the message because it was a prominent figure. And secondly, because it might be some kind of a small cell that is operating, and most probably it is, because there has not been any major resistance that we knew of before this, and I'm going to talk about this just a little bit. But that means that their resources would be extremely limited on what they can do. So like thinking that a small cell of, I don't know, 5 people gathering up in a garage would not be able just next day to try to assassinate Putin. It would require a lot more planning and a lot more resources in it. But why is this very relevant and important for the cause of war in Ukraine? My biggest argument that I had about the Russian Federation and people inside the Russian Federation is that the Russian opposition does not want to understand that this is war. In the same way that we in the West don't want to say that this is war and understand that this is war. In our internal mind, we are still living in a peaceful society. So for us, this is still peace, right? We don't understand that. For example, I've read that, well, you cannot just be for killing Dugina because of what she was talking about, right? But this is a age-old philosophical question about should the tolerant society tolerate intolerance? And there is a long talk about this. But what we need to know is that we need to have a switch that Russia and Ukraine are in a state of war. And we should be also in a state of war. So by that point, when Russia is already acting on the philosophy that is peddled by Dugina and Dugin and by the followers of their thought, whatever they're saying, so when they're coming with the statements that, hey, we should physically exterminate Ukrainians, and once we're done with Ukrainians, we should go and physically exterminate anyone who is opposing our Russian people. Right now, as a country that is acting on this philosophy, as driving people with actual heavy weapons into the territory of other sovereign nations, they are actively promoting the killing and facilitating the killing of civilians, people, and so on. There is so much blood on their hands just by the words alone that it is hard to even understate. So we cannot just say that they were just bystanders to the atrocities that are happening in Ukraine. In a large part, they are the cause of the atrocities that are we seeing in Ukraine. Their rhetoric and the philosophy was what dehumanized Ukrainians to a lot of the Russian soldiers and made excuses for them. Why is it okay to kill Ukrainians or kill civilians, or why is it okay in 21st centuries to bomb city blocks? And we still, in our Western comfortable world, we're still living in a comfortable life, drinking our nice, tasty lattes and having it good. And we need to have that mentality switched on. And I want you all, if you're following me, to actually switch on and understand that the war is going on. But coming back to the point about why is it relevant for the Russian opposition to target this, as I explained, my main critique is that the Russian opposition was not willing to radicalize. Essentially, that a lot of the rhetoric that came out of Russian opposition, even after the war started, was basically a peacetime rhetoric, right? There is war going on. Russian soldiers are invading sovereign nation. They're killing and raping civilians, and you're talking about trying to win some kind of small local elections, trying to change the thought of the people in the kitchen, right? It's far beyond that, right? When the war is already started, you're not supposed to be already in opposition. You're supposed to be a resistance, right? When we're talking about, let's think about parallels. Let's think about France, right? So we're not expecting some French politician start explaining the opposition that we should go into the next election with the German occupiers. They already should start forming the resistance movement, or in Germany, for example. So one of the big questions was, will the Russians ever radicalize? Will they start fighting for what is right? And this is where I'm finally starting to eat my words that I promised so long, is that yes, if it was indeed the Russian opposition, and if there will be more activities like this, if there will be actual resistance within the Russian Federation that is fighting the ideology, this Putin's regime, that is actually fighting for some kind of a place of the Russian society, that they understand that in a large part it's their shit to clean up as well, and it's not just for Ukrainians to sacrifice their lives, and then the Russians just saying, well, it was all Putin, it was not us who did it. And while it's a small act, and I'm looking very much forward that there will be more activities like this that would target the actual people that are in charge of this regime, as hopefully the resources of that resistance cell will grow. But we must see. It is still nice to know that there is some kind of resistance within Russia, and they are actually trying to fight this regime one way or another.